Okay. Correct me if I blow anything. Feel free to just, be yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're live. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the Senior Executive Editor of Bloomberg Opinion, and this is our politics live stream. We are going to talk about Black male voters today and a lot of the hand-wringing accompanying where their allegiances lie, how they might vote. It's a great topic to use as a departure point for larger discussions about where the Dems are with their base. And joining me today is Nia Malika Henderson. She's a columnist with Bloomberg Opinion. She covers politics and policy. And Brackton Booker, he is a writer with Politico. He's the author of the Recast newsletter, which covers the intersection of race and identity with politics and policy. So let's get going. We only got about half an hour and there's so much to talk about here. We will take audience questions. So any of you watching us, if you have a question, just put it into the stream and our producer, Mary Newman, will pluck it out of the ether and put it in front of all of us. And we'll try to come up with an interesting or reasonable response. At least my two friends on the live stream will be able to. I might struggle. Nia, well, let's set the stage first. Why are people showing some recent anxiety, specifically about Black male voters? And when I say people, I'm talking about political observers, pollsters, people in the weeds, and certainly operatives on the ground. The Democratic Party is as some agita over this issue. But tell me, when did this begin percolating and why?
Yeah, listen, I actually think it began percolating a few cycles ago, and you would see polling maybe 2018, certainly in 2022, that showed before elections would happen that Black men, and in some ways the Black vote in general, might be trending Republican. I mean, people were talking about 20% of Black people in 2022 possibly voting for Republicans. Now, a lot of the polling that was forecast to suggest there was going to be this great, amazing realignment away from Democrats to Republicans among Black voters, and more specifically Black male voters, a lot of it didn't really happen, right? So what I see as happening is a kind of reversion to the sort of norm in terms of Black American voting patterns, right? Sort of the pre-Obama norm, where guess what? Black people voted for Republicans, anywhere from 10 to 15%, and of course, Black men, like all groups, demographics, are more Republican than women. So that's some of what we're seeing. I think also what we're seeing is Democrats tend to panic in general in any given scenario, any time of day, every day, all day. That's true. But there's also, I think, a real grappling with what does the Harris coalition look like, right? It's not going to be Obama's coalition. It's not going to be Biden's coalition. What does a winning coalition look like with Harris, who's got 100 days, right, to put together a coalition? Obama had many more, years than that, 2 or so, from the time he sort of burst onto the national scene. Biden obviously had many more, and Donald Trump as well. So for Kamala Harris, the real challenge is, how do you piece together a coalition? What does it look like? And what does it look like under what does appear to be a demographic realignment around class, right? So when we're talking about Black men, there are 48 million Black people in the United States. Half are Black men. Any number, millions are of voting age. The Black men we are talking about are younger, 18 to 34 age group. They're infrequent voters. They're often, like a lot of folks of that age group, are low information voters, and they're working class. And I'm not specifically just talking about Black men being lower information voters. I'm talking about this group just more broadly among all demographics. So this is giving the Democratic Party some angst because of the timeline, because of this reassortment and realignment. And again, I keep reminding people that the vast majority of Black men who go to the polls will vote for Kamala Harris. I predict it'll at least be 80%.
Well, let's slow down on that one. We've got so much to unpack on that before we
Yeah.
start laying odds. But Braxton, do you have anything to add to that about the landscape right now for the Democrats with Black voters and Black male voters in particular, in terms of why this is surfacing and why people are anxious about it?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, and Malika laid the groundwork, so it's easy for me to just come in and try to like pepper this with some color. I think the first thing to tackle is this is very much a class issue. I know we want to look at this through the lens of race, but this is very much a class issue. And Democrats overall have shown this cycle in particular that they have challenges messaging to the working class voters of America. Now, that has also been true for several cycles. You look back to the Hillary Clinton cycle of 2016 and why Trump was kind of able to come onto the scene. It's because she really didn't have this kind of working class speaking to the pain of folks who work in like the manufacturing sector of America, and how those jobs have slowly been either dispatched overseas, or how a lot of these industries have changed over time. And so you can't necessarily just graduate from high school and walk into a factory job and be able to like be firmly into the middle class if you stay there long enough. The other thing too, I want to take a step back, is like the last two times that we've had a Democrat win the White House, I'm talking about Obama in 2008 and Biden in 2020, the country was at this really, really big inflection point, right? We're talking about when Obama first came on the scene, we're talking about 8 years of war come following George W. Bush, right? And also an economic collapse. So I think Obama's rise during 2007, 2008, being able to overcome Hillary Clinton, and he was sort of this new untested figure. People were gravitating to him, right? And Black people in large numbers, especially because they're like, whoa, Black folks may never get a chance to vote for a Black president again. Let's get behind this eloquent, somebody who can give this soaring rhetoric, and it worked. 2008, 2012 re-election. You fast forward to 2020, what was happening? I mean, Joe Biden was able to secure the nomination with the help of, obviously, Black folks, especially Jim Clyburn, having to get behind him once there was a deal made that he would pick a Black woman vice president. But there was also a racial reckoning after May 25th, 2020, where folks were already home with COVID. Black folks were dying in disproportionate rates. So it forced Democrats to say, hey, we're going to put equity front and center.
And George Floyd. Don't forget about George Floyd.
Of course. Yep. George Floyd. That's May 25th. So like we had a racial reckoning plus COVID plus 4 years of Trump, and that really drove a lot of Black folks to say, hey, let's maybe flip the page here. And that's why you see Biden getting roughly 87, almost 90% Black vote during that time. Fast forward to 2024. This is a long-winded way to say, like, we do not have that kind of racial tension, this big upheaval in our politics right now. I think the closest thing you could get to is the conflict in Israel and Hamas, which you're already seeing that has negatively impacted how Kamala Harris has been able to reach certain groups, particularly here in Michigan, where we're talking about Arab and Muslim groups. And how they are not going to support her. So when you're looking at this kind of in totality, you're looking at Black folks saying like, okay, there's not this big kind of racial push going on in our society. So I think folks are looking at both candidates to say like, how is my life going to change with Kamala Harris in office or with Donald Trump in office? And obviously we've seen polling, the further that Trump gets the further that Trump has been out of office, the more nostalgia folks have for his presidency. So the stimulus checks, that's like hey, the strongman type on the national stage and on the international stage. And I think a lot of folks, black or white, especially when we're talking about working class, like that strong man appeal. And Harris, as we're
And I
seeing,
guess that nostalgia makes you forget about the racism and some of the crimes and some of the other predations. That's an interesting dynamic in all of this. Nia, Bracton sort of set up a particularly well-known black man for us to discuss before we get off further on this, Barack Obama. He was in Pittsburgh last week. He, I think, during the week became almost like an avatar for this issue about where is the black male vote and how to incent them and incent black male voters. And he gave a speech and then did an informal huddle in a field office in Pittsburgh, in which he implored black men to essentially get with the program, do the right thing, come on out and talk. And you use that, or come on out and vote. And you use that as a departure point for a very interesting and pointed column. And I want to quote from you. You were responding in the top of your column to Obama's statements. And you write, "Don't be sexist. Vote for Kamala Harris." That's one heck of a bumper sticker message. And it comes from America's first black president, the hope and change candidate, and a message directed explicitly at black men. Prediction: black women will be the most pro-Harris voting bloc come November. The second most pro-Harris, pro-freedom, pro-democracy voting group, you probably didn't guess it, black men. So expand on that a little bit, Nia. And I will point out to our audience that you wrote the column with passion from an airport or an airplane seat, I think.
Yeah, I was headed to South Carolina where I grew up. So yeah, I was typing it out on my phone, which is the way I covered Obama in 2008, except I was typing it out on my BlackBerry back in 2008. Yeah, listen, I covered Obama for a really long time and have written very similar pieces about him over the years, because he has taken a sort of hectoring, lecturing approach to African Americans in a way that he has never done with any other group. And in some ways, that was an appeal for some black people and certainly white people who saw in Obama someone who could sort of lecture to black people and kind of fix the problem of Black America. So, if you sort of look at the trajectory of him as a public figure, he did that quite frequently as a candidate. It was his sort of way of being, his sort of Sister Soldier moment, I think, sort of distancing himself from black people to show to white people that he wasn't going to be beholden to black people. He sort of evolved. I wrote a column in 2014 that said he kind of moved beyond that lecturing. So in some ways, it was a little surprising that he comes out in 2024. In some ways, his fortunes have fallen, I think, particularly among the younger generation of African-American voters. And you even saw some of that in some of the data from 2008 to 2012, sort of the sheen of Obama sort of dissipated as the years went on. So it was in some ways surprising that he took this lecturing tone to African-American men who I argue are sort of being set up as a fall guy, sort of collective fall guy for Kamala Harris if she loses. And if you think about the numbers of African-American men in these swing states, it is minuscule compared to the population of white people, right? I mean, if you look at Michigan, I talk about this in the piece, it's like 80% white people and it's 5% black men. Everyone will say, sure, that they're a small group, but they really matter and margins matter and all that. This is true, but it's also true that if you're Barack Obama, you might, if you're going to be in a lecturing mood, which I actually don't think anyone should be in a lecturing mood when it comes to trying to engage voters and entice
as a campaign strategy.
Yeah, this is a bad campaign strategy. And so I don't think he should be lecturing anyone. I wrote the piece because my phone started to blow up, right? People were texting me, people were emailing me. I was emailing back and forth with my editor about this speech and the reaction to it, which I think most people, African Americans, thought wouldn't work, was tone deaf, and in some ways a reminder of some of the aspects of Barack Obama that people had grown tired of. And so yeah, so I wrote the piece. I sort of hatched out the lead and at 5 a.m. and then wrote the rest on a plane in a flurry of memory, sort of memory of the Barack Obama from 2008, and then within the context of this larger issue around Black men. I have been told that he has gotten the message loud and clear that this isn't the way to go. He's going to be out on the campaign trail in trying to galvanize voters, and particularly Black voters. I think there was a question, and we sort of talked about this before we got on, is whether or not he's even the right messenger, right? Barack Obama, I think, is like 60 something years old, which is a great age. Magic Johnson is out there. He's in Michigan, Lansing kid, went to Michigan State, won many, many years ago. I think he's 65. And again, the group you're looking at, it would be better if there were sort of campaign signs on whatever the popular, I don't know if people play Xbox anymore, but whatever the popular video game is, right? Because that is.
I do play Xbox. I can confirm as the father of a teenager.
Yeah. It's okay. Okay, there you go. I have a 4-year-old, so she's not there yet. So that would probably be more effective. And I say in the piece, I actually think Kamala Harris has a better sense of what to do than some of the surrogates out there. She has gone on All the Smoke. I think they're talking to Joe Rogan about possibly going on that show. She's going to do the Shade Room. She did Maverick Carter's podcast. This was months ago. Because in so many ways, Kamala Harris was trying to reach this group even before she was the nominee, right? This was her task to kind of engage with this community of folks, Black men, younger folks, just that Democratic base. And so she, I think, has a much better sense of what to do than some of these surrogates that are out there. And so she's going to be doing that. I know, Braxton, you're in Detroit. She's going to be talking to Charlamagne the God. She rolled out these policy initiatives. I think policy is kind of silly and not necessarily effective, but it's box checking. So she did some of that.
Yeah,
Bracken is noted. Go ahead, Bracken.
I was saying box checking for sure, and that's why I'm in Detroit to see what this latest box check looks like in a city that is roughly 80% Black, and a city that historically has a high turnout for Black the Black electorate, but we'll see if she can get over 50%. That seems to be kind of the common threshold. If a Democratic candidate can get 50% of the vote, they typically win the state. Hillary Clinton did not get 50% of the vote in Detroit. She ended up losing Michigan. So we'll see.
By about 10,000 votes, I think, right? Wasn't it?
About 10,000 votes. So that's why a lot of people. The last time I was here, Vice President was here, but she did not meet with any kind of Black clergy or Black officials, at least not publicly, right? And that kind of stirred ruffled a lot of feathers, because they're like, she's missing layups. She's missing layups where she could just easily come, hold a rally, interact with some Black folks, and then get especially folks in the clergy, they can then move their congregations and say, look, Kamala came and talked to us. This is what she said. Let's move in one direction to vote for her. But without that ask, without that pitch, a lot of folks are like, well, we're not just going to fall in line if we're not going to be asked to come out and vote. And to Nia Malika's other point, Obama has been on the national stage, like we said, since 2007. So if Harris is going to be this change candidate and moving the country forward, why isn't she bringing more people who are much younger? She could use Hakeem Jeffries, who, if things go Democrats' way and they win back the House, he would be the first Black speaker. But we haven't really seen her kind of lean into his surrogacy all that much. She's much more connected to kind of hip hop community, right? There was a rally early on in Georgia that she had, where she had Megan Thee Stallion, she had Quavo of the hip hop group Migos coming out. Where are these folks who can really touch the culture for her and get these people to move in unison for her. We haven't really seen that kind of outside the box thinking, right? Obama's always been rolled out as the closer in chief, right? For 2022, for Biden in 2020, but it's like if you were in middle school when Barack Obama was president, his words are not going to have that same effect because he is now this old man who's still talking to you now that you're an adult and you're of voting age. So if you can come up with surrogates, I mean, Democrats have a lot of Black elected officials up and down their bench, and why isn't the Harris campaign using them to be effective messengers? I wish I knew the answer to that because it seems to make a lot more sense than rolling out the first Black president. But I will say that there is still time. That's what a lot of Democrats will tell you. Still time to change a lot of hearts and minds. But I think this is why you're seeing her up her interviews, whether it's in non-traditional media, going to like Joe Rogan's podcast and try to like get some folks who are independent or maybe want to see her in a much more kind of contentious interview setting. Can she mix it up a little bit? What will she do when she's not getting sort of these softball questions like, hey, when's the last time you talked to Beyonce and how did you come to getting Freedom as your campaign song? Like that's cute, but like I don't know if that's necessarily going to move voters if they don't think she can answer hard questions.
What would move voters then? What's the line of questioning that you think would move voters?
I mean, look, this policy rollout is a good start. I think having
and you're speaking about her plan to offer financial incentives,
yes,
specifically
yes.
targeted to Black men to make it easier to launch a business or unburden themselves of some debt, but to break down some of the barriers that prevent Black entrepreneurs from launching small businesses.
Yes. Also deals with some of the things, criminal justice system, helping some Black men get into the kind of fledgling cannabis industry, and making sure that criminal records don't impact their ability to get into some of these markets, and also helping to get a pipeline of more Black men into teaching professions so that students can have access to a Black male in their formative years of education. So that plan is a good start. I think a better question is like, how is she going to pay for this, especially if we don't expect that she's going to have both chambers of Congress. So she's going to have to work with Republicans on some of these ideas. How does she plan on getting this passed? Is this just through executive order? And then the other question too, like is policing. Policing did not the George Floyd Policing Act did not get across the finish line under the Biden administration. She said that, look, she wants to sign this into law if she is the president. But again, if she doesn't control both chambers of Congress, how does she plan on getting, a federal policing reform bill across the finish line? She hasn't really answered any of those questions, but I think it would be a good start if she is kind of challenged on some of these things that Black Americans seem to really want.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we have to acknowledge is that Kamala Harris is a woman, and that does play a role in the campaign. I don't think Barack Obama went about it the right way in raising this issue of sexism and gender. But one of the things you do see with the younger group of all men, or again, we're talking about the 1834 group, who are high school graduates, sort of working class community of folks, is they are much more traditional in their views around gender, right? So there is this idea, I think, that does come into play for some of these voters. And again, I'm talking about all men. I'm not talking about Black men in particular, that there is a kind of mommy party with the Democrats and a daddy party with the Republicans. And that has existed for many, many years. You've covered politics for years. And so the fact that Kamala Harris is a woman, Hillary Clinton also a woman, that does have a role in how voters see her and whether or not they trust her, whether or not they see her as strong, whether or not they see her as somebody who is good in terms of the economy. You have in Donald Trump a figure who was a kind of hip hop royalty for many, many years. He would be name dropped in all sorts of hip hop lyrics. And so that is at play. And so I do think Barack Obama is hitting on something when he talks about sexism coming into play when voters are making a decision about who they trust and who they want to represent them. I don't think he went about it the wrong way in terms of singling out Black male voters and suggesting that they have more of a level of sexism than any other voter, right?
So would you have said, how would you, if you could have reconstructed his message? Maybe you would have just said, dude, don't even say this at all. But
yeah,
if he was going to address this, what would have been the most effective way to address it?
I think you do it in more of an affirmative way, right? I mean, I think the reality is that millions of Black men in general are going to go to the polls with their daughters, right? They're going to go with their sisters, and I think you make an affirmative case for Kamala Harris as the person who Barack Obama thinks will be the best president. And then what the data shows is that there is, if you make Trump out to be a figure who is somebody who does harm to the Black community, right? What he did with Central Park 5, the fact that he didn't want to rent to Black folks, that is actually a sort of negative motivating factor for a lot of Black voters, right? So I think that's the direction to go. I am not a political strategist. I do know that lecturing to voters is not a good political strategy. Yeah. And I think they have to, again, I think, I read your article and I saw one of the pastors be like, oh, she didn't even come to my church. Have you gone to a Black church lately? There are not a lot of Black people there. People don't go to Black churches in the way that
not younger ones, especially, right?
Exactly. Certainly not younger. That kind of demographic we're thinking about, Black men. So that is, my father was a Black preacher, so I don't have anything against Black preachers, but I do think they are grappling with, a kind of irrelevant status and having kind of difficulty with that. And I certainly think that with this issue of this demographic, this.
Nia froze there for a minute, Bracken. Maybe we've got to pick up.
Okay, well, look. Right here, I'll pick up this one.
Well, can I ask you a specific thing? Go ahead.
Oh, sure.
Okay. I sort of think there's this PTSD. You're in Detroit. Hillary Clinton didn't go to Detroit until the very last legs of her 2016 campaign, and I think her camp was focused on flipping Georgia, possibly. They had their sights on some southern states, and the blue wall got left behind, and they started to panic towards the end of her campaign. She showed up in Detroit at the last minute. She visited some churches, and I think. She lost Michigan by the narrowest of margins. And people said, had she been more present in Detroit, that might have turned things around. You can't say that the Harris campaign hasn't been present in Michigan, right? I think the issue is, are they present in the right way, which Nia was just touching on. If the Democratic playbook is to drive up to a church in an era where no one's in that church, then the playbook should get rewritten, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the Harris campaign is starting to rewrite some of the playbook. Now, obviously, whether or not those plays remain in future playbooks depends on if she wins, right? Like the reliance on influencers, right? You saw that certainly at the convention. She certainly relied on some influencers, like local influencers, to get their message out on kind of local folks' Instagram and TikToks and that kind of thing. But I will also say that right now they're also battling a lot of information being put on social media, which is definitely hard to combat, right? Which is why you go on podcasts like, Call Me Daddy, right? Like something like that, so you can like perpetually be in the social media ecosystem. But I will say, like the point I want to make about Obama's comments were not unfamiliar to a lot of Black folks, right? Like these conversations have been happening for some time about like, where are the brothers? Where are the brothers? Why do they keep, drifting away? And why are they open to Trump? Why are they not getting behind Harris? Like the way that Black
Why,
women
why are they open to Trump, Brackton?
Well, look, I think a lot of it has to be with has to do with like this feeling that he is just stronger on the economy. Obviously, the Harris campaign is dealing with coming out of inflation woes, people feeling like their money does not go as far as it once did, certainly under a Trump administration. And obviously, you can argue that Trump benefited from an Obama economy prior to the pandemic, but folks don't necessarily give credit where credit is due. They just say he's in the White House right now. I feel better about my finances. Let's go with the business guy, right? I think that's part of it. I think another part of it too is that a lot of folks, racism aside, about singling out Haitian immigrants and vilifying other immigrant communities, they like the fact that Trump is Trump, right? He says what's on his mind. And while he was vilified by some when he was in Detroit last week, talking about, Detroit's like a third world country. You don't want the rest of the country to be like Detroit, and it will be if you elect Kamala Harris. To some, like that's racist. Like, why is he always vilifying majority Black cities? But if you felt like your Democratic leadership, if you have like an all Democrat, mayor, city council, and you feel like this city council has ignored me and my plight, you actually may resonate a little bit with those comments. And like, well, damn, I'm working my tail off. I got 2 jobs and I can't seem to get ahead. And all I see is Democratic leadership. The state is run by Democrats. Democrats have a trifecta in Lansing, and I'm not getting ahead. So having some guy, a former president, come in and like rail against that actually does speak to some of the woes that some folks are feeling. And that cuts across racial lines. So I do think this election, when we do the post-mortem, is really going to be a lesson in how you message to the working class voters of this country. Like, I hate to say it, like I went
regardless
to
of race. Would you say that's regardless of race? Whether it's working class Latino voters, working class Black voters, working class white voters, there's a shared economic need.
America is about capitalism, and if you don't have access to that game, if you don't feel like you have access to the financial leverage that can give you a shot of getting ahead, then yes, you feel like this country is not working for you, and you want to hear from a presidential candidate that's going to speak to those issues. Like, everybody wants to get ahead. Everybody wants to be able to provide for their families. And if you feel like one party is speaking directly to you and the other one is, well, if we just help everybody out, then everybody gets lifted. It's like, I don't care about everybody. I care about me and my own. So I'm going to go with the person who's speaking directly to me.
I also think the anti-immigrant racism works on lots of voters of a lot of different demographics: Black voters, Latino voters, certainly white voters. If you are a working class Latino, if you are a working class Black person as well, you are often living in communities. And this is in some ways thanks to Governor Abbott from Texas. He's bused a lot of people and flew a lot of these folks who come into the country into these communities. And so if you're a working class Black person, if you're a working class Latino, you are now sharing resources, right? The hospitals might be filled up in a way that they weren't years ago because you are sharing an emergency room, a waiting room with folks who look different than you. If you are a working class Black person, you might be sending your kids to school with folks who look different than you. And now you are sharing resources in schools that were already overcrowded. And so racism is a fantastic strategy to motivate people. I hate it. It's terrible. It's divisive, but it's incredibly effective because it is America's original sin. It is sort of the idea of America is that there is one class that is somewhere, and there's another class, a sort of caste system and a racial hierarchy. So for years, Republicans said, we're not going to play the race card. We're not going to play identity politics. And then Donald Trump, who didn't invent identity politics, but watched a lot of Fox News and sort of got the rhetoric down. That's what he's doing. And to the extent that he could win, and I certainly think he's the favorite, this is what the campaign is going to be based around, right? It's going to be based around this us versus them, and them being browner people and blacker people who somehow are un-American because
Or are
they
coming for your jobs.
coming
That's
for
the
your
other part of it.
jobs, they're coming for your houses, they're coming to kill you. And this is sort of the last stretch of the campaign, and that's why you see Donald Trump amping up the rhetoric. And Kamala Harris is such, because she is Black, because she is a woman, it's a play that is that much more effective. It was harder to make this play, I think, against Joe Biden because he's sort of a genteel, certainly in 2020, a genteel older white man, and white voters trusted him in a way that they don't necessarily trust Kamala Harris to keep the bad Black and brown people away and out of this country and out of our hospitals and out of our schools and out of our job lines. So that is, it's sort of the economy, but it is really sort of an economic argument wrapped in a racist, xenophobic, winner-take-all caste system argument. And it could be very effective because, again, I think it works on Black people and brown people. And listen, racism, it's an ideology, right? It's a brainwashing. It isn't sort of a birthright or sort of a genetic fixture. It is a way of thinking, and Black and brown people are not immune to anti-Black and anti-immigrant sentiment.
We are almost at the end. We're beyond the end of our time, unfortunately. But I wanna put a better bow around the end of this. But I'll ask you to be brief. Braxton, do you think the issue of the participation of male Black voters in this election is going to end up being non-consequential, and that there are better things to focus on?
Oh no, well, yes. I mean, to Nia Malika's point, look, I think how white women, especially suburban white women, how they break this election cycle is going to be pivotal. But if Trump somehow gets to that 22 up to 25% of Black men, I think that is going to be a major focus about how Democrats allowed this key voting bloc to slip. And like, there's lots of reasons for that, and I think we touched on some of those things. But it's like the party also waited to the very last minute to message to this key voting bloc. And I think that is going to be the Achilles heel if Harris somehow does not win or like loses a significant portion of Black men. Even if the majority of Black men end up showing out for her, it's going to be, why wasn't she able to deliver her people to her the presidency? So I don't think it's an insignificant thing. I do think there are other racial groups that should be paid attention to as well, but Black men are going to be key in this closing stretch.
Nia, in the top of the show, I kind of cut you off when you started making some odds because I wanted to save it for the end of the show. But how do you see this playing out? I think you're optimistic about how this will eventually lay down, right?
Listen, again, I think Trump is the favorite because he's a white man, and the odds tend to favor white men in this country. It's a country that's never elected a Black woman governor. And so, listen, I think Kamala Harris is on a tightrope here because the more she seems to be catering to any Black group or brown group, she risks alienating white voters who are the majority in these swing states. We'll see what her coalition is. I think if she wins, it's going to look sort of like a typical map, right? The blue wall remains intact. Maybe she can pick off one of those southern states, maybe North Carolina. I'm dubious. But I think it's going to be a close map with her winning those traditional states. I think she actually might end up pulling out Nevada as well. But her coalition is going to look different. And I think we have to get used to that, right? The Obama years, that was a high water mark. The Trump years are what they are. And Biden was sort of a unique figure because of the COVID, landscape. And, if she wins, it's going to look different. It's going to be more upper class white people, right? As there's this, as Brackton talked about, there is this realignment around class, and obviously there's overlap with some of these Black male voters as well.
Nia Malika Henderson, you're a columnist with Bloomberg Opinion. Brackton Booker, you're a writer for Politico and the author of the Recast newsletter. Thank you both for sitting down with me today. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor. This is the end of this installment of Bloomberg Opinions Politics live stream. Thanks for joining us.